Everyone saw the look on his face that morning, but no one asked why. Because sometimes in quiet neighborhoods, the real battles aren't fought with fists or guns. They're fought with whispers, rules, and the people who think they own you. I never thought fishing at the pond down the street would start a war. But in that moment, with the line tugging gently in my hands and the sun cutting across the water, I realized peace doesn't last long where pride and power collide. The HOA had always been strict. Grass height, trash bins, even where kids could ride their bikes. But when I found out the pond was stocked with bass, I thought maybe, just maybe, there was a piece of nature left untouched by their control. It felt like freedom. That's when she showed up, Karen. Everyone called her that behind her back, though I don't think she would have cared. She lived 2 streets over, walked her little white dog every morning like she was patrolling, scanning, ready to pounce on anything out of order. And when she saw me with that fishing pole, her eyes lit up like she'd caught a criminal. "You can't do that here," she snapped, clutching the leash like it was a badge of authority. I tried to stay calm. "It's a public pond stocked by the county. I'm not hurting anyone." Her lips curled into a smile that wasn't a smile at all. "Not while I'm around." Most people would shrugged it off, packed up their gear. But I didn't, because something inside me, maybe stubbornness, maybe dignity, refused to give her that victory. And that decision, it set everything in motion. The next morning, she wasn't alone. 2 men stood behind her, tall, rough-looking, the kind of guys you'd expect to see leaning against a truck in a bar parking lot. They didn't say a word at first, just stared at me, waiting for me to move. "Still fishing?" she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "I told you yesterday you don't belong here." And for a second I felt fear crawl across my chest, because it wasn't about fishing anymore. It was about power, about whether one person could decide the rules for everyone else. I glanced at the men, their arms crossed, their silence louder than threats. My hands shook as I reeled in the line, pretending not to notice them. But inside I was boiling, not with anger, with humiliation. That feeling when you know someone's trying to break you down, piece by piece. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing her voice, that sharp finality in her tone, like she was the law, like I didn't matter. And the thought hit me, if I let this go, if I let her win, what would it teach me about myself? About how much I was willing to bow just to avoid conflict. The truth is, it wasn't about fishing anymore. It was about respect. So the next day I returned. Same pole, same spot. And sure enough, Karen and her men appeared again, only this time one of them stepped closer, too close. His shadow stretched over my tackle box. "You heard the lady," he muttered. "Pack it up." That's when something inside me shifted. Fear gave way to resolve, because no matter how intimidating they looked, they didn't own the pond. They didn't own me. I took a slow breath and said, "You don't make the rules, the wildlife officers do." They laughed, a short, mocking laugh, like I was a child. But they didn't know I'd spent the night researching every law, every regulation, and I knew legally I was right. Still standing there, heart pounding, I couldn't shake the thought, what if this gets worse? What if next time it's not just intimidation? That question lingered heavy as I packed up again, but this time I wasn't walking away defeated. I was walking away with a plan. Because sometimes dignity isn't about fighting back right there in the moment. Sometimes it's about patience, about waiting for the right time to show the truth. And deep down, I knew the truth would be bigger than any of them could handle. Why does fear feel heavier in silence than in noise? That's the thought that haunted me the next morning as I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the fishing pole leaned against the wall. The men hadn't touched me. They hadn't even raised their voices. But the way they stood there, the way Karen smiled like she'd already won, it was enough to make the air feel poisoned. I should have let it go. That's what most people would tell you. It's just fishing. But it was the principle. If they could decide where I could stand, what I could do, then what was next? My yard, my driveway, my life. I poured myself coffee, hands trembling just enough to make the mug clink against the counter. Every sip tasted bitter, not because of the coffee, but because of that feeling. Humiliation wrapped in anger, tied tight around my chest. And that's when I remembered something my father used to say. A bully only wins if you play by his rules. Karen thought she had the rules, but she didn't. The real rules were written somewhere else, by the state, by the people who stocked that pond and protected the wildlife. So I made a call. The voice on the other end was calm, almost too calm for the storm inside me. A wildlife officer, patient, measured. I explained what happened, the fishing, the men, the intimidation. He didn't interrupt. He didn't laugh, he just listened. And then he said something that changed everything. You were right to call us. That pond is under our jurisdiction. If anyone's harassing you for fishing there, they're the ones breaking the law. For a moment, I just sat there in silence. The relief was overwhelming, but so was the fear, because now I knew I wasn't crazy, I wasn't overreacting. Karen wasn't just annoying, she was wrong. And not just wrong, but punishable. The officer asked me to describe the men. Their build, their faces, their behavior, I told him everything. When I mentioned Karen's name, he didn't respond right away, just a pause that said more than words ever could. Finally, he said, "We'll take care of it. Next time you go fishing, give us a heads up, we'll be there." And that was the moment I realized I wasn't alone anymore. Still, as I hung up the phone, doubt crept in. What if Karen found out I called? What if the men came back angrier than before? Sometimes, doing the right thing doesn't feel like strength. It feels like stepping onto thin ice, not knowing if the next step will crack it beneath your feet. But I went anyway. The pond looked the same. The water shimmered in the morning light, peaceful, almost mocking me with how normal it looked. Birds skimmed the surface. The world felt still, and for a second I wondered, was I overthinking this? Was this really worth it? That's when I heard footsteps. Karen's voice cut through the quiet like a blade. Unbelievable, still here. The men were with her again. Their shadows fell long across the grass, but this time I wasn't shaking. I wasn't clutching the pole like a shield. Because I knew something they didn't. "I told you," she hissed, "no fishing." And before I could even respond, before I could gather the words I'd rehearsed in my head the night before, a different voice spoke from the trees. "Actually, he's allowed." The wildlife officers stepped out, uniforms sharp against the sunlight, radios clipped at their shoulders. The men turned stiff, like statues caught in the act of moving. Karen froze, the color draining from her face. The officers didn't raise their voices. They didn't have to. Their presence alone shifted the balance of power in an instant. "Ma'am," one officer said firmly, "you have no authority to enforce fishing rules here. This is state-managed property. And if you've been hearing people to intimidate residents..." He let the sentence trail off, heavy with implication. Karen tried to laugh, a high, nervous sound. I was just looking out for the neighborhood, these men." But her words died under the weight of the officer's gaze. "Looking out for the neighborhood," he repeated, "by harassing someone following the law." For the first time, Karen looked small, smaller than her dog, smaller than the leash she clutched like it might save her. The men shifted uncomfortably, their tough exterior cracking. One officer pulled out a notepad, took their names, asked direct questions. The silence between each answer was suffocating. And me, I just stood there, heart racing, watching justice unfold in slow motion. Because the truth is, dignity doesn't always come from raising your voice. Sometimes it comes from letting the right people speak for you. By the time the officers told me I was free to fish, Karen was already walking away, her men trailing behind like shadows with nowhere left to hide. I thought it was over, that maybe she'd learned her lesson. But as I watched her retreat, shoulders stiff, jaw tight, I knew deep down, people like Karen don't just back down. They regroup, they plot, they come back stronger. And in that moment, as I cast my line into the pond again, I couldn't shake the question. What would she try next? Why do some people fear losing power more than they fear losing dignity? That's the question that echoed in my head the following week, every time I walked past the pond, every time I felt the breeze on the water and remembered the look on Karen's face when the officers called her out. You would think that kind of humiliation might change a person, make them quieter, humble, maybe even apologetic. But with people like her, it only lights the fire. The days after the confrontation felt strange. Quiet, almost too quiet. No men lurking in the background. No sharp voice cutting through the air to remind me I didn't belong. For a few mornings, I almost let myself believe it was over, that the fight had ended with a single victory. But the truth was waiting, patient, cruel, inevitable. The first sign came in whispers. A neighbor, hesitant, approached me at the mailbox. His voice low, his eyes darting like he was afraid of being seen talking to me. "Hey, I don't know if it's true, but Karen's been telling people you're dangerous." I blinked. Dangerous for fishing. He shrugged helplessly. "She says you threatened her, says those officers only showed up because you've got connections. She's painting you like some kind of bully." And that's when I realized, if she couldn't win with force, she'd try with poison. Not the kind that goes in your body. The kind that seeps into your reputation, piece by piece, until people look at you differently. The next few days confirmed it. Neighbors avoided eye contact. Conversations ended when I walked by. One family even pulled their kids inside when they saw me coming down the street. It stung more than I wanted to admit, because I'd lived in that neighborhood for years. I'd mowed my lawn, waved hello, kept to myself. I thought respect came from being decent. But respect, I was learning, can be stolen faster than it's earned, if someone loud enough decides to rewrite your story. I tried to ignore it, tried to keep fishing, to let the water soothe the anger rising inside me. But every cast felt heavier, like I was fighting invisible currents. Every smile I forced at a neighbor felt hollow when they looked away. And then came the letter. It was tucked neatly under my doormat, no return address, just my name scrawled in angry ink. "You don't belong here. Stop before it gets worse." My hands shook as I read it, but not from fear, from disbelief, because suddenly it wasn't just about Karen's pride anymore. It was about intimidation disguised as community. It was about someone deciding I didn't deserve to live where I lived. I called the wildlife officers again, told them about the letter. The officer on the phone listened quietly, then said, "This is escalating, keep it, we'll make note of it." I asked if they could do more, arrest her, charge her, something, but the answer came back steady, unshaken. "We need more, don't worry, we'll get it. People like this always push too far." Still, it didn't make the nights easier. I found myself double-checking the locks, pausing at every sound outside. I had never felt unsafe in my own home before, but now the shadows seemed longer, the quiet sharper. One night I caught myself staring at the ceiling, whispering into the dark, "Why me? Why this? Why is fishing enough to make someone hate me this much?" And the only answer I found was this: some people don't care about the rules, they care about control. And when they lose it, they'll burn the whole world just to feel powerful again. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning. I went down to the pond as usual, trying to keep routine alive, trying to prove to myself I wasn't broken. The water was still, the sky pale with early light. For a few minutes, it almost felt normal again. Until I saw the sign. A large, freshly posted board stuck into the ground near the path. Bold red letters screamed across it. "Private property, no fishing. TRSBSSERS will be PROSSUTED." My chest tightened, because I knew it wasn't official, it wasn't county-issued, it was Karen, her money, her audacity. Neighbors walked by, reading the sign, nodding. Some even pointed at me, whispering like the proof was right there in front of them. I wanted to rip it out of the ground. I wanted to shout until the whole neighborhood understood, but I didn't, because rage is exactly what she wanted. Rage makes you sloppy. Instead, I took a picture, front, back, even the loose screws where she'd rushed to hammer it in. And as I stood there, camera in hand, heart pounding, I told myself, this isn't the end. Because sometimes justice doesn't come fast. Sometimes it crawls, slow, steady, until the moment it's undeniable. And I knew Karen had just given me the evidence I needed. What she didn't know was that it wouldn't just be taken down. It would be the start of her undoing. What happens when a lie grows too big to hide? That's what I kept asking myself as I stared at the bold red letters on that fake sign Karen had planted. Private property, no fishing. The words weren't just paint on wood. They were a declaration of war. I didn't touch it, I didn't yell, I didn't give her the satisfaction. Instead, I took my evidence home and sent it straight to the wildlife officers. Photos, time stamps, even a video of me walking around it, showing there was no county seal, no state logo, nothing official at all. When the officer called me back, his voice had a new edge to it, firmer, more certain. You did the right thing, that sign is illegal, we'll be out there. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. But Karen wasn't finished. That night I heard voices outside my window, low, hushed, but close enough to make my stomach twist. I pulled the curtain back just an inch, and there she was, Karen, standing at the curb with two of her men again. They weren't laughing this time. They were pointing toward my house. Every muscle in my body went cold, because intimidation in the daylight is one thing, but intimidation in the dark, that's a different kind of message. I could call the police, I could shouted, but I didn't. I turned off the lights, sat in the shadows, and waited until they left. And while I sat there, heart hammering, I made myself a promise. This wasn't going to break me. The next morning, the wildlife officers arrived at the pond. Their truck pulled up just as I got there with my fishing pole. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, drawn by the flashing lights, and the authority stamped across those uniforms. One officer walked straight to the sign, examined it, and with a single yank, ripped it out of the ground. The sound of the post tearing free echoed across the water like a verdict. Karen showed up minutes later, storming down the path, her dog yapping at her heels. Her face was flushed red, her words already spilling out like bullets. "What do you think you're doing? That's HOA property." The officer didn't flinch. He held the sign up like evidence in a courtroom. "This isn't authorized. You can't post false regulatory notices on state-managed land. It's a violation of law." Her eyes darted to me full of venom. "You did this." I didn't answer, because for once I didn't need to. The truth was answering for me. The officer went on, his tone calm but unyielding. "Ma'am, we've received multiple complaints of harassment, threats, and now this. I'm warning you this stops or there will be charges." For a heartbeat, the entire world felt still. Neighbors had come out now, gathering quietly along the path, watching. For weeks they'd heard her version of the story. But now they were seeing another one written in uniforms, authority, and undeniable evidence. Karen tried to laugh it off, tried to wave her hand like this was all some misunderstanding, but her voice cracked, her composure faltered. And the more she spoke, the more she looked like exactly what she was, someone desperate to hold onto power she never had in the first place. The officers didn't stay long. They loaded the fake sign into their truck, gave me a nod, and reminded me, "Call us if it happens again, we'll be watching." And then they left. But the moment they drove off, Karen turned back to me. Her voice dropped low and sharp so only I could hear. "You think this is over?" she hissed. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Her eyes burned, not with fear, not with shame, but with something colder, something dangerous. And as she walked away, shoulders stiff, leash jerking in her hand, I realized she wasn't done, not even close. That night I sat in my living room, lights low, fishing pole leaning in the corner like a silent reminder of everything that had unfolded. I thought about the sign, the officers, the neighbors' stares. For the first time, some of those neighbors had nodded at me. Quiet, small gestures, but enough to say, "We saw, we know the truth now." And yet the victory felt hollow, because the look in Karen's eyes told me she was planning something worse. Lies hadn't worked, signs hadn't worked, intimidation hadn't worked. So what would she try next? I didn't have to wait long to find out. A few days later, a notice appeared taped to my door, official letterhead, bold font, stamped urgent. It looked like a legal warning, but as I read it, my stomach dropped. It was from the HOA, or at least that's what it claimed. A violation notice for improper use of community resources. The words were vague, carefully written, designed to sound legitimate without saying anything specific. But I knew whose fingerprints were all over it. Karen hadn't just declared war at the pond. Now she was dragging the entire HOA into it. And the chilling part, With the right signatures, with the right lies, she could turn paperwork into punishment. Fines, hearings, even threats against my home. The pond had been the battlefield, but now it felt like the war had only just begun. What do you do when the paper in your hand feels heavier than stone? That's what ran through my mind as I stared at the violation notice taped to my door. Words printed in black ink, stamped with an HOA letterhead, but every line dripping with Corinne's fingerprints. Improper use of community resources. It sounded official. It sounded damning, and it was designed to, because anyone else reading it wouldn't see lies, they'd see rules, authority, punishment. I sat at my kitchen table with the letter spread in front of me. My chest burned with frustration, but beneath it was something deeper, fear. Because I knew how these things worked. Fines stack up. Warnings turn into hearings, and if you don't fight back, paper can bury you deeper than fists ever could. For the first time, I wondered if she might actually succeed. Not at keeping me from fishing, but at painting me as a problem big enough to erase. I called the wildlife officer again, my voice than I wanted it to be. I read the letter out loud. Silence hummed on the other end before he finally spoke. That's not their jurisdiction. They have no authority over fishing regulations. None. Keep that notice. It's evidence. Evidence. That word cut through my fear like a spark in the dark. Because suddenly I wasn't just the victim anymore. I was a witness, and every lie Corinne threw at me was another piece of rope she was tightening around her own neck. The officer's tone hardened. We're already coordinating with county enforcement. You've done everything right, but she's escalating. It won't be long before she crosses a line we can act on. I hung up, the letter still trembling in my hands, and thought, how many lines does she have left to cross? The neighborhood felt different after that, watching me, waiting. Some neighbors whispered apologies under their breath as I passed, but most stayed silent. Their silence hurt more than the stares, because silence means safety, and safety for them meant letting me carry the weight alone. But even in the quiet, I could feel the tide shifting. Corinne had played her cards too loudly, too recklessly. People were beginning to wonder if maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the hero she claimed to be. One evening, as I packed up my tackle box by the pond, a neighbor I barely knew approached me. He looked nervous, glancing around like he didn't want to be seen. I heard what she's been saying about you, he muttered. It's not right. And I saw her printing things at the community office. Looks like she's been making those notices herself. The words hit me like thunder. Proof, not suspicion, proof. I thanked him quietly, my heart racing, and asked if he'd be willing to repeat that to the officers. He hesitated, then nodded slowly. And just like that, the cracks in Corinne's empire began to show. But Corinne, she wasn't finished. 2 days later, I woke up to find chalk markings on the sidewalk in front of my house. Arrows pointing at my door. Words scrawled in jagged letters. Rule breaker. My stomach turned cold, not because of the insult, but because it wasn't just her anymore. She had others joining in. People willing to put their hands to her cause. People who believed her poison. I took photos, sent them to the officer. He didn't even sound surprised anymore. She's losing control, he said, and when people like her lose control, they make mistakes, big ones. He was right. That weekend, as I cast my line into the pond, 2 county vehicles pulled up. The officers weren't just wildlife enforcement this time. They were joined by local deputies. Corinne arrived moments later, storming down the path, her voice already raised. You can't just let him do this. He's harassing the neighborhood. He's breaking the rules. The deputies didn't look at me. They looked at her. And the wildlife officer I'd been working with, calm as ever, pulled out the fake notice I'd given him. He held it up like a weapon. Is this your signature, ma'am? Corinne froze just for a second. Then she tried to laugh. I don't remember. It might have been a draft. We were just trying to protect property values. But her words tangled around themselves. The deputies weren't smiling. One of them pulled out a recorder, clicking it on. This is forgery, ma'am, and harassment. You understand that, don't you? Neighbors had gathered again, their whispers swirling like wind through the trees. This time the looks weren't at me. They were at her, watching her unravel. Coren's face twisted, a storm of rage and desperation. She pointed at me, her finger shaking. He's the problem, he's the one who started all of this. But her voice cracked, her authority was gone. And in that moment, standing with the pole in my hands, water glinting behind me, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Relief. Because justice wasn't just possible anymore, it was inevitable. The deputies didn't arrest her that day, not yet, but they took the notice. They took statements. They took names. And when they left, I saw Coren standing on the path, shoulders heaving, her world crumbling under the weight of her own lies. For the first time, she looked afraid. But deep down, I knew fear wouldn't stop her, not someone like Coren. And as I walked home that evening, I couldn't shake the thought. When pride collapses, it doesn't go quietly. It explodes. And I had a feeling the explosion was coming. What does desperation sound like? Sometimes it's not a scream. Sometimes it's not even words. Sometimes it's silence that feels too sharp, too heavy, like the air is holding its breath before something shatters. That silence followed Coren after the deputies left with the forged notice. Neighbors who once nodded at her avoided her now. The whispers weren't about me anymore, they were about her. About what she'd done. About how far she'd taken it. And in that silence, I thought maybe, just maybe, it was over. But desperation doesn't fade, it festers. The first sign came 2 nights later. A pounding at my door sharp enough to shake the frame. My chest tightened as I froze in the hallway. Through the peephole I saw her, Coren, her hair wild, her fists clenched, shouting words I couldn't fully make out. I didn't open it, didn't answer. I stood in the dark, heart thundering, listening as she hurled accusation after accusation through the wood. Liar, criminal, you won't ruin me. It went on for minutes, until the sound of a passing car sent her retreating into the night. I called the deputies, my voice shaking. They listened, patient, and told me, keep documenting. She's building her own case against herself. And though their calm steadied me, I couldn't shake the unease. Because people don't knock like that unless they're breaking, and when they break, they lash out. The next morning, I found my mailbox ripped open. Envelopes scattered across the street. It wasn't just vandalism, it was a message. That was the morning I stopped pretending this was only about fishing. This was about safety. The wildlife officer called me later that day. His tone was different now, no longer just steady but urgent. We've been in touch with the HOA board. Most of them had no idea about the notices. She forged more than one. She's gone too far. Gone too far. Those words sank into me like an anchor, because I knew what they meant. This wasn't just conflict anymore. This was the threshold, the line between intimidation and criminality. And still, she pushed further. That weekend, I walked to the pond just after sunrise, the air cool, the water reflecting pale streaks of light. I thought I'd be alone, but as I rounded the bend, there she was, Coren. No dog, no men, just her, standing by the water, waiting. Her eyes locked on me, burning with something beyond anger, something closer to obsession. You ruined everything, she spat, her voice trembling. The board thinks I'm a fraud because of you. The neighbors look at me like I'm dirt because of you. I gripped my pole, forcing my voice to stay calm. You did that yourself. Her laugh was sharp, unhinged. No, this was my neighborhood, my rules. Until you don't belong here, you never did. Her words hit harder than I expected, because beneath the fury there was truth, not in what she said, but in what it revealed. This wasn't about fishing. It was never about fishing. It was about control, territory, power, and in her mind I was the invader who had dared to stand against her. For a moment we just stood there, the pond between us, the silence thick, and then she stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper I could barely hear over the breeze. If I go down, I'm taking you with me. Those words stayed with me long after she stormed off, her footsteps crunching angrily down the path. I didn't fish that morning, I couldn't. My hands shook too much. When I got home, I called the officers again, told them everything. The threat, the mailbox, the late-night pounding on my door. This time their tone wasn't calm, It was decisive. Document it all, we're filing charges. She's crossed the line. Relief washed over me, but so did fear. Because if she was willing to forge documents, vandalize property, and scream threats in the night, what would she do when she realized the law was closing in? That evening I watched the sun set through my window, the sky burning orange and red. I wanted to believe it was almost over, that the worst had passed. But deep down I knew storms don't end quietly, they end in thunder. And Karen's thunder was still coming. Have you ever felt the air change, right before everything collapses? That's how it felt the night it all came to a head. The air was heavy, charged, like the whole neighborhood was waiting for the explosion we all knew was coming. I had just settled in, lights low, a movie humming in the background I wasn't really watching when it started. A crash outside. Not small, not subtle, glass breaking. My heart leapt into my throat as I rushed to the window. There she was, Karen, her hair wild, her face twisted with rage, hurling rocks at my front yard. One had already shattered the garden light. Another cracked against the siding of my house. I froze because it wasn't just vandalism anymore. It was madness. Her voice ripped through the night, loud enough for the entire block to hear. You think you can ruin me? You think you can make me the villain? I'll show you what happens to people like you. Neighbors' lights flicked on, curtains twitched, people peeked out. And for once no one turned away, everyone saw, everyone heard. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and dialed the deputies. My voice was breathless as I explained what was happening. They didn't hesitate. Stay inside, we're on our way. But Karen wasn't waiting for them. She marched up to my porch, fists slamming against the door hard enough to rattle the frame. Come out, face me, you're nothing without them. I pressed my back against the wall, heart pounding. Every thud of her fists felt like it was hitting me instead of the door. And then flashing lights cut across the street, sirens, radios crackling. The deputies' cars screeched to a stop in front of my house. Wildlife officers pulled up right behind them. The neighborhood was awake now, gathered in clusters along the sidewalks, watching the spectacle unfold like a scene from a film. Karen didn't stop, not even when the officers shouted for her to step back, not even when deputies advanced with flashlights raised. She turned to them wild-eyed and screamed, "He's the criminal, he's breaking the rules, you don't understand, this is MY neighborhood." Her words tumbled over themselves, frantic, desperate, each one louder than the last. But they weren't sharp anymore. They were unraveling. A deputy stepped forward, calm but firm. "Ma'am, you're under arrest. Step away from the property." For a second she froze, her chest heaved, her hands shook, and then she laughed, a sound so brittle it sent shivers down my spine. "You can't arrest me. I am the HOA." But even as she said it, even as the words left her mouth, she knew it wasn't true. The deputies moved in. One took her arm. She jerked back, screaming, clawing at the air, but there was no power left in her fight, only panic. Neighbors gasped as the cuffs clicked shut. Some whispered, some shook their heads, but every single eye was on her, the woman who had ruled with intimidation, now reduced to a spectacle under flashing lights. As they led her to the car, she twisted her head, locking eyes with me. Her voice cracked as she spat the last words she'd ever throw at me. "This isn't over, you'll regret this." The door slammed shut, the car pulled away, and just like that, the storm broke. The crowd slowly dispersed, lights flicked off one by one. Silence returned to the street, heavier now but cleaner. I stepped out onto the porch, the night air cool against my face, and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My yard was littered with broken glass, shards glittering under the moonlight. But for the first time in weeks, I felt something deeper than anger. I felt free. One of the deputies lingered as the others left, his flashlight sweeping across the broken pieces. He turned to me, his expression steady but kind. "You did the right thing," he said. "You stayed calm, you documented everything. That's why this ended tonight." I nodded, my throat too tight for words. Because he was right. Sometimes strength isn't about fighting louder. It's about standing firm when every voice tells you to bow. As he drove away, I sat on the porch steps, watching the sky lighten just a hint at the edges. The night was ending. The worst was over. But deep down, I knew part of me would never forget the way her voice sounded through the door, the way her fists shook the walls. Because scars don't always sit on the skin. Sometimes they live in the silence after the shouting stops. And yet, even with the weight of those scars, one thought kept me steady. She was gone. And for the first time, the pond was truly mine again. Why does the quiet after a storm feel both heavy and sweet? The morning after Karen's arrest, the neighborhood felt different. Not just because one person was gone, but because the weight she'd carried around, the fear, the whispers, the tension, had lifted. Like a ceiling being removed, leaving space for light to fill the air again. I walked down to the pond, fishing pole in hand, and for the first time in weeks the water looked untouched. The morning sun glinted off the ripples, birds skimmed the surface, and even the air smelled clean. Peace wasn't a loud celebration. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but undeniably there. Neighbors nodded as I passed, not the polite nods of weeks past, but genuine acknowledgement. Small smiles, brief hellos. A few even thanked me quietly, as if sharing the truth of what had happened was too heavy to say aloud. I didn't respond much. Words weren't necessary. The truth had already spoken louder than any confrontation ever could. Karen's fallout spread quickly. HOA meetings revealed her forgeries. Complaints piled up. Legal notices confirmed she had misrepresented herself, intimidated residents, and violated multiple statutes in her desperate attempt to maintain control. The wildlife officers and deputies provided evidence from my reports. Pictures, letters, video clips, they all painted a single, undeniable picture. Her authority had been a house of cards, and the slightest pressure had brought it all down. I didn't attend the hearings. I didn't need to. Watching from a distance was enough. Justice didn't need my presence. It needed the truth. And the truth had spoken in a courtroom, in the county office, in the form of signatures, stamps, and sworn statements. When the verdict came, Karen faced fines, probation, and a formal record of harassment and forgery. Her power, her influence, her carefully constructed world, all stripped away by a combination of law, patience, and courage. It wasn't vengeance. It wasn't joy in her downfall. It was relief. Because the real victory wasn't in seeing her punished. It was in knowing that the truth, once documented and unwavering, could protect people. That sometimes standing firm, refusing to bow, refusing to be intimidated could actually work. The pond became my refuge again. Every cast of the line felt lighter, every ripple in the water a small celebration of resilience. The air no longer carried tension. Children played nearby, dogs ran off-leash, and for the first time I allowed myself to smile fully without guilt or hesitation. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting golden light across the water, a neighbor approached me, quiet, hesitant. "Thank you," she said softly, "for standing up, for showing us what was real." I nodded. No words could convey the weight of the past weeks. The fear, the humiliation, the nights lying awake wondering if she would come back with worse. All of it felt distant now, yet impossibly vivid. Sometimes I think about Karen, about the rage, the obsession, the need to control everything around her. And I realize she wasn't just a bully. She was someone trapped by her own fears, desperate to prove she mattered, and unwilling to see that power built on intimidation always collapses. That thought doesn't make me angry anymore. It just reminds me why standing your ground matters. Why documenting, seeking help, refusing to give in, these aren't just acts of defense. They're acts of dignity. Life in the neighborhood slowly returned to normal. The HOA meetings became routine again, focused on grass heights and community events, not intimidation or forged letters. I still fish at the pond every morning. Still feel the sun on my face, the tug of the line, the quiet comfort of nature. But I carry a lesson in my chest that morning walks and shimmering water can't erase. Courage isn't always loud. Strength isn't always visible. Sometimes it's in the quiet act of refusing to let fear dictate your life. And sometimes it's in letting the law and the truth do their work while you stay steady. I never expected fishing to lead to a war. I never expected neighbors to be complicit in silence or for one person's obsession to become a community nightmare. But it did. And through it, I learned something I'll carry for life. Standing up doesn't just protect you. It can protect everyone around you who's too afraid to speak. As I reel in my line one last time that evening, watching the orange glow fade into dusk, I feel the weight lift completely. The pond reflects the last light, smooth and clear. I breathe deep, savoring it. Hoakaren is gone, the officers did their job, the truth stands, and for the first time in months I feel safe, proud, and free. Sometimes, the battles we think are small end up being the ones that teach us the most. Sometimes victory is quiet, and sometimes it tastes like sunlight on water. And as I walk home, fishing pole in hand, I know, peace isn't just the absence of chaos. It's the presence of truth, patience, and the courage to never back down. The story ends here,